The smell of orange blossom drifted in from the open window, mixing with the faint trace of massage oil still lingering in the air. I stood in the living room, barefoot, my hair damp from the shower, wearing the same oversized linen shirt I always wore when my husband was away. He was behind me, quiet, still, watching me. Not saying a word. The room was warm, almost too warm, like the air had thickened with something unsaid. He stepped closer. I didn't move. Not away, not forward. Just there. His breath was steady. Mine wasn't. I turned my head slightly, barely an inch. Our faces were closer than they ever should have been. And then the front door slammed. We both froze. Footsteps echoed through the hallway. His expression shattered into panic. I took a step back. My heart punched against my ribs. It wasn't supposed to be like this. None of it was. But let me tell you how it all began. From the very start. Before I begin the story and tell you how everything really happened, answer this question: do you agree that everyone deserves a second chance after cheating? The sky was cloudless that morning, so bright it made me squint even behind the curtains. I heard his car door slam outside before I saw him. My husband, lugging his suitcase to the trunk, mumbling something about traffic on the A6 and not forgetting to water the monstera. He barely looked up when I waved goodbye. The moment his tires crunched down the gravel driveway and disappeared behind the olive trees, I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. It was Thursday. He wouldn't be back until Sunday. The house was mine again. Silent. Spacious. Stifling. I padded back into the kitchen, turned up the volume on the radio, some old flamenco I didn't recognize, and danced around barefoot while slicing tomatoes. The rhythm felt good in my body. Freeing. It was the only part of me that still felt like me. I didn't notice him at first. I turned to reach for salt and there he was. Leaning against the doorframe like he belonged there. Hair wet from a shower. White t-shirt sticking to his chest. Holding 2 coffees from that overpriced place downtown. I figured you'd want something better than instant, he said. I tried not to smile. I failed. He set the coffee on the table and wandered off without another word. The house felt warmer after that. By noon, I had run out of things to pretend to clean. I sat in the living room flipping through a glossy magazine, skimming headlines about summer detoxes and finding yourself in Mallorca. All I found was a tightness between my shoulders I couldn't ignore. When he passed by with a towel slung around his neck and earbuds in, I didn't think. I just said it. Do you know how to massage? He raised an eyebrow. Pulled out one earbud. Massage? My back, I clarified. It's been stiff all week. He hesitated just long enough to make it awkward, then nodded. Sure. I mean, I took a class. Once. He disappeared into the guest room and came back with almond oil. Where the hell did he get almond oil? I stretched out face down on the living room rug. Shirt bunched at my neck. Breath shallow. The first touch startled me, not because of what it was, but because of what it wasn't. It wasn't hesitant. It wasn't intimate. It was precise, almost clinical. Like he was trying not to feel anything at all. We didn't speak. I focused on the ceiling fan above me, spinning so slowly it might stop at any second. When he finished, I sat up, mumbled a thank you, and fled to the bathroom. I stared at myself in the mirror, chest flushed, jaw clenched. I looked like a woman caught halfway between impulse and regret. The next day passed like a poorly written play, everything staged, every line too rehearsed. We barely crossed paths. I made lunch and left it on the counter. He ate without a word. I read a book I'd already read last summer. I couldn't tell you what it was about. By Friday night, the air was heavy with something unspoken. I walked into the guest room without knocking. He was packing. I didn't know he was leaving. I thought you were staying until Sunday, I said. He glanced up. Plans changed. I didn't ask why. He didn't explain. That evening I called my sister. Told her everything was fine. That I was making roasted peppers and having a glass of Rioja. I hung up before she could ask anything real. Saturday morning, I was out watering the plants when I saw the neighbor's car pulling up. She stepped out in her tennis whites and waved like we were old friends. We weren't. Your husband left early, didn't he? I nodded. She tilted her head. I saw a young man coming out of your house yesterday. Visiting? Family, I said too quickly. She smiled. The type of smile that carried judgment folded neatly between her molars. By afternoon, he was back in the living room. Shirtless. Reading. Like nothing had happened. Like everything hadn't. He asked me about the monstera. I told him I forgot to water it. Still looks alive, he said. Looks can be deceiving, I replied. The silence after that was louder than any argument I'd ever had. Sunday came. My husband was due back before lunch. I cleaned the kitchen 3 times. By noon, I'd changed outfits twice and burned toast. The doorbell rang. My heart jumped. But it wasn't him. It was a delivery. A package I didn't order. For my husband. The label said Valencia, but the return address was from Barcelona. I opened it. Inside was a book. Leather-bound. No note. No explanation. It was a collection of poetry. Spanish. The kind he used to read to me when we were first married. But it wasn't the book that twisted my stomach. It was the bookmark tucked inside, pressed between 2 verses about betrayal and longing. A receipt. Dinner for 2. Last week. Barcelona. A name I didn't recognize. My husband wasn't supposed to be in Barcelona. He told me he was going to a reunion in Valencia. I heard a key turn in the front door. I closed the book. Set it on the table. And smiled. He stepped through the door just as I finished placing the book back on the table, his suitcase rolling behind him, wheels clicking rhythmically across the tiles. I had no time to think, no time to adjust my expression. The faint smile I had forced myself into moments earlier remained, frozen on my face like a mask left too long in the sun. He kissed my cheek without real warmth, mentioned something about the long drive back, and asked if the sprinklers had given me trouble again. I told him no. I lied. While he disappeared into the bedroom to unpack, I stood still in the kitchen, watching the box with the book, wondering if he knew I'd opened it. Wondering if he expected me to. He stayed for barely an hour. Said he forgot he had to meet a colleague for lunch. Said he'd be back late. Said he missed me. And just like that, he was gone again. I waited 15 minutes. Maybe 20. I made sure the car didn't double back. Then I went to the guest room. He was there. Sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling through something on his phone, barefoot, his hair still damp from the shower. He looked up before I said a word. We didn't talk. I walked past him into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stood by the window, staring out into the courtyard. He joined me a moment later, leaning against the opposite counter. His presence was too calm for the tension humming beneath the surface. I'm heading out for a walk, I said, my voice low. Come if you want. I didn't wait for his response. The sun was too bright, the light too clean. The world outside didn't match the heaviness inside me. We walked through the back gate, down the narrow path between the cypress trees, past the stone wall that separated our property from the neighbors. I could feel him behind me, not close, but near enough that I knew he was there without looking. We stopped under a fig tree. Its shadow gave just enough relief from the heat. I sat on the stone bench. He didn't sit. He asked if I was okay. I said nothing. He asked again. I turned my head and looked at him. Then we kissed. That moment barely lasted a breath. We pulled away. I looked past him, pretending to focus on the sound of cicadas in the trees. He didn't move. Just watched me. Everything around us felt too still, as if the world was holding its breath. The walk back was silent. I headed inside and closed the back door gently behind me. He lingered outside. I heard the low creak of the hammock on the porch swing shortly after. Inside, I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face, avoiding the mirror entirely. I didn't want to see what my eyes looked like. That evening, the house felt even more unbearable than the heat outside. The AC wasn't working properly, and everything stuck to my skin. Dinner was nothing but grilled zucchini and cheese from the fridge. We didn't speak much. He asked if I was nervous. I pretended not to understand the question. At around 10, I told him I was going to sleep early. I didn't. I went to my room and sat at the edge of the bed, fully dressed, lights off. I listened. To the wind. To the cicadas. To the fridge cycling on and off. To my own heartbeat, loud and erratic. Then I heard the creak of the guest room door. Soft footsteps on tile. A hesitation. Then retreating steps. I didn't move. The next morning, I woke before dawn. I made coffee, strong and bitter. I drank it on the patio while the sun slowly crept up over the olive grove. He joined me after a while, carrying his mug, still half asleep. "You don't sleep much anymore," he said. I didn't answer. After breakfast, I left the house. I told him I needed to run errands in town. I didn't go to the store. I drove around aimlessly for nearly 2 hours, past bakeries, cafes, roundabouts full of dusty roses, and a road I hadn't taken since last summer. Eventually, I parked in front of the beachside promenade. I sat there, engine off, watching a group of kids kick a soccer ball, older women gossiping on benches, and a couple arguing too loudly near a show stand. I stared at my hands on the steering wheel for a long time. They looked tired. Like they didn't belong to me. When I came back, the house was filled with the scent of oranges and fresh bread. He had gone to the bakery. The same one my husband used to love. We ate in silence. Then I turned to him. "I don't know what this is," I said. He looked straight at me. "Neither do I." After lunch, I returned to the living room and picked up the book from the previous day. The leather cover still warm from the sun through the window. I thumbed through it again, stopping at the same page. The book marked 1. Dinner for 2. Barcelona. His handwriting, faint, in pencil on the edge of the page, Maria. I had never heard of her. I went outside and sat on the old swing at the edge of the property. The one that creaked if you pushed too hard. I rocked slowly, my legs barely moving. He came out and sat on the steps, a few feet away, not facing me. The sun started to dip, casting gold through the dry air. "Do you miss him?" he asked. It wasn't the question I expected. "Yes," I said without thinking. Then I paused. "I don't know." He nodded slowly. The kind of nod that meant he understood in a way words never could. The next morning started too quietly. I woke with a weight in my chest that hadn't been there before. I walked through the house. Something was wrong. Then I saw it. A single shirt hanging on the back of the guest room door. His bag was gone. His bed made. I looked around the room, half expecting it to be a joke. That he had gone for a run, maybe. That he'd be back with coffee. But there was no note. Nothing. I went to the front porch. No sign of the car. I checked the kitchen, the garage, even the garden. Silence. I stood in the middle of the hallway, listening. Still nothing. Then, a sound. Soft. Metal on tile. I turned. The front door creaked open. My husband stepped in. I forgot my sunglasses, he said casually, walking past me, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve. He didn't look surprised to see me. He didn't ask where the boy had gone. Instead, he walked to the kitchen, opened the fridge, took out a bottle of water. Then, as he turned back toward me, his eyes narrowed just slightly. And he asked, "Did you miss me?" I didn't answer his question. Just stared back at him, searching for something in his expression, humor, sarcasm, suspicion, but there was nothing. Just a neutral calm that somehow made it worse. He drank half the bottle in one long pull, then set it on the counter. He looked around the kitchen like he was trying to place himself inside it again, like the layout had changed without him. "I'm heading to the office," he said, already walking down the hall. "Don't wait for dinner." The front door closed before I could speak. Not that I had anything to say. I stood there, back against the fridge, arms crossed, hearing only the clock ticking above the sink and the muffled hum of the garden sprinkler stuttering to life. A moment later, I turned toward the guest room. Empty. Still made, like it had been frozen in time. I looked down at my bare feet on the cool tile and forced myself to move. The air in the house was thick with heat. The AC continued to fail, sputtering now and then like it was giving up. I opened every window I could. It didn't help. I shed my cardigan, tied my hair, and took a mop to the floor just to distract myself. Every movement felt rehearsed, like I was playing a role in someone else's house. By mid-afternoon, the heat became unbearable. Even the walls seemed to sweat. I decided to take the laundry out to the line behind the house, where the lemon trees offered at least a sliver of shade. That's where I found him. He was seated on the grass, his back against the stone wall, eyes closed, head tilted toward the sun. He looked peaceful. Too peaceful. I stopped in my tracks. He opened his eyes as if he'd sensed me. "It's like a sauna in there," he said, squinting. "Feels like August," I replied, setting down the basket. He didn't offer to help. Just watched as I pinned bedsheets to the line. I pretended not to notice. My hands moved on their own, folding, stretching, clipping. The breeze lifted the fabric now and then, and I watched it flutter like sails over still water. "You okay?" he asked after a long silence. I hesitated. "You left without saying anything." He looked down at the grass, plucking a leaf and twisting it between his fingers. "I thought it'd be easier." "For you or for me?" He didn't answer. I turned back to the sheets. They snapped suddenly in the wind, loud and sharp, like something breaking. When I finally finished, I walked past him to the gate, stopping just before opening it. "Are you staying or leaving again?" I asked without looking back. "I don't know." That was all he said. That night, the air remained thick, unmoving. I couldn't sleep. I threw off the covers and sat on the edge of the bed, staring out the window at the olive trees swaying gently in the dark. I heard a soft knock, so faint I almost thought I imagined it. Then again. I crossed the hallway barefoot. He stood there, quiet, hands at his sides. His shirt clung to his chest from the heat. I stepped aside, and he entered. We kissed. It was neither urgent nor rehearsed. Just real. Unavoidable. The moment dissolved as quickly as it began. We didn't say anything after. I went back to my room. He went back to his. But nothing felt the same. The next morning, the house greeted us with another blackout. No power. No lights. No fan. Just sunlight pouring through the kitchen windows like a spotlight on a stage that neither of us wanted to stand on. I tried to make coffee on the gas stove, struggling with the matches. He watched me silently before stepping in to help. Neither of us spoke. The sound of the match scratching and the kettle hissing filled the space where conversation used to live. By midday, he suggested we drive to the lake. Said the heat was too much and there was nothing else to do. I didn't answer at first. Then I nodded. The ride was quiet. Windows down. The dry wind licked at our faces. We passed shuttered shops, closed cafes, and lazy dogs sprawled in the shade. When we finally turned onto the gravel road that led to the lake, the dust followed us like a second skin. There was no one there. We walked to the edge of the water, kicked off our shoes, and sat in the shade of a half-dead eucalyptus tree. The lake shimmered like cracked glass under the sun. I dipped my feet in the water, letting the cold rise through me. I used to come here with my dad, he said after a long silence. Before he got remarried. I glanced at him, surprised. He never spoke about his father. I didn't ask questions. The wind picked up. Leaves rustled above us. A dragonfly hovered for a moment before darting away. I keep thinking I should leave, he added, eyes on the water. Then why don't you? He shrugged. Because I also keep thinking you'll ask me to stay. I didn't answer. We stayed until the sky began to turn golden, until the sun dropped low enough to remind us how far from home we were. The ride back was even quieter. The silence between us didn't feel empty, it felt full, stretched, vibrating with everything we couldn't say. As we neared the house, the road curved sharply. I warned him too late. The tires skidded. Gravel flew. The car jolted, then steadied. We looked at each other, neither of us breathing. Then we laughed. Out of shock. Out of relief. Out of something else we didn't dare name. We pulled into the driveway, still buzzing from adrenaline. I stepped out first, brushing dust from my dress, heart still racing. Before we reached the front steps, the blue lights hit us. Guardia Civil. An officer approached the car, motioning for him to step aside. I froze. The officer spoke calmly, asking for documents, explaining the speed check near the bend. A warning. Nothing serious. I stood back, keeping my face blank, hands at my sides. When they left, he turned to me, smirking. I told them you were my aunt, he said. I hope you also told them I'm the responsible one. We both laughed. It wasn't funny. Back inside, I headed to the kitchen, craving cold water, needing to splash my face. He followed behind me, steps soft, careful. I reached into the cupboard for glasses. That's when I noticed it. The envelope. Thin. White. Tucked neatly under the fruit bowl. My name on the front, in handwriting I knew far too well. My husband's. I stared at it, heart slowing. He wasn't supposed to be home yet. I turned, hands trembling slightly. I didn't put that there, he said quietly. I know. And then we both heard it. The unmistakable sound of tires on gravel outside. Not pulling in. Pulling away. I didn't run to the door. I stayed frozen in the kitchen, staring at the envelope. My name on it looked deliberate. Centered. Not rushed or emotional, not angry or desperate. Just placed. Like something prepared in advance. I didn't touch it. I didn't even breathe near it. Behind me, he shifted his weight. I could feel his eyes on me. "Do you think he saw something?" he asked. I didn't answer. Outside, the gravel drive settled into silence. No footsteps. No engine restart. No door opening again. Just absence. We waited another full minute before I moved. I stepped toward the door and peeked out the window. Nothing. The car was gone. Back in the kitchen, the envelope was still there. I picked it up like it might burn me. The paper was thick. The kind used for wedding invitations. Or apologies. I opened it. But it wasn't a letter. It was a single page. Folded once. 2 words. Written in clean, unmistakable script. "I know." That was all. No explanation. No accusation. No demand. Just quiet certainty. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until the edges of my vision narrowed. I handed him the note. He read it. Said nothing. But I saw his hands tense. The silence between us was unbearable. I turned, walked to the sink, turned on the tap, and let the water run over my wrists. The cold stung. When I turned back around, he was gone. I found him pacing in the living room. His shoulders were tight. He was speaking, but mostly to himself, half sentences, unfinished thoughts. He paused when he saw me. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means we're not as careful as we thought." "Do you think he followed us?" "No." "Then how?" "I don't know." He sat down hard on the couch, head in his hands. The silence between us had shifted. It wasn't uncertainty anymore. It was inevitability. He asked if I wanted to leave the house. I said yes. Without thinking. Without knowing where we'd go. I packed a bag. Just a weekend one. Like we were going on a casual trip. We drove out of the city, west toward the mountains, toward a small village I remembered visiting years ago with my sister. It wasn't far, 2 hours, maybe, but it felt like another world. We didn't speak during the drive. Not until we saw the sign, Casa Rural La Nube. The woman at the desk gave us a room upstairs, overlooking the hills. Everything smelled of pine and lavender. There was a small wooden balcony and a table for 2. The room was simple. Quiet. Safe. He lay down on the bed without saying a word. I stood at the window and watched the wind ripple through the hills. That evening, we didn't go out. I made tea with the packets in the cabinet. We sat on the floor, leaning against the bed, legs stretched out in front of us. He asked me what I thought my husband would do. "I don't think even he knows," I said. Later, the power flickered. A storm rolled over the valley. Lightning flashed behind the hills, and the rain came slowly, then all at once. We opened the window and listened to it pour. We spent night together. The next morning, everything felt different. Still. Heavy. I woke first and stepped out onto the balcony. The air was damp. Fresh. The hills still cloaked in low fog. Birds moved through the trees like it was just another normal morning. But I couldn't shake the weight in my chest. When he came out, his eyes were darker. Tired. We didn't talk much over breakfast. We took our coffee to the garden and sat under the pergola. The rain had stopped. Everything smelled of wet earth and rosemary. He asked if I regretted any of it. No, I said quickly. Then paused. But I regret not knowing how it ends. We checked out just before noon. On the drive back, we passed a market in a small town. He pulled over. Said he wanted to pick up something to cook later. I waited in the car. I watched him through the window as he disappeared between stalls. And then I noticed the message on my phone. From my husband. Just a location. No words. Just a dropped pin. I stared at it. My fingers hovered, unsure. It was sent 20 minutes ago. He was nearby. I told him we had to leave. Now. He asked why. I showed him. He didn't ask anything else. He just drove. I watched the GPS closely. The route he was taking led not to our home, but toward the coast. He was already ahead of us. We didn't go home. We went to a cafe outside of town and sat by the window. I couldn't taste my coffee. I stirred it for 10 minutes without drinking. I looked up and noticed him watching me. He didn't say anything. Just pushed his chair back. He went outside. Took a long walk down the street. Vanished into the crowd. When he returned, he had a small bouquet of wildflowers. I didn't ask why. He placed them on the table between us, looked out the window, and said quietly, "You can't go back pretending nothing happened." I nodded. Not because I agreed. But because there was nothing left to deny. We left the cafe and drove toward home slowly. The silence in the car this time wasn't heavy. It was sharp. When we pulled into the driveway, my breath caught in my throat. My husband's car was there. But the front door was open. Wide. I stepped out, heart hammering. The house was silent. Inside, everything looked the same. Nothing touched. No mess. No sign of confrontation. Until I stepped into the bedroom. On the nightstand, there was a photo. A printed one. Not digital. Not from our collection. It was taken in Toledo. Of me. And him. Walking, laughing. And someone had circled our shadows. Just the shadows. In red ink. I stood motionless, staring at the photo. My fingertips tingled as if the ink itself had burned me. The shadows circled in red seemed almost louder than the people in the picture, louder than our bodies, our faces, our expressions. The implication was clear. The message wasn't in the photo. It was in the act of choosing to circle what couldn't speak but said everything. He walked in behind me, stopped, and looked over my shoulder. Neither of us said a word. We didn't need to. The photo rested between us like a live wire. I placed it down slowly, face down on the dresser. My hands were trembling, and I hated that he saw it. I hated even more that I couldn't stop it. We left the bedroom. Not together. Just at the same time. In the hallway, the air was thick. No sound from the kitchen. No keys on the counter. No luggage by the door. His car was still outside, but he wasn't in the house. I checked the living room. The patio. The garage. Nothing. I walked into the guest room. Everything untouched. Except the desk drawer, which was pulled open an inch. Inside, one of my scarves. Folded. Placed on top of his passport. I didn't understand the meaning of it. I didn't want to. He walked in again a moment later. Still no words. I looked at him, really looked. His expression was locked down, unreadable, like a wall had come down behind his eyes. Then, without warning, he picked up the scarf, folded it tighter, and put it in his bag. I didn't ask why. I didn't want to hear the answer. That evening, the house filled with noise again. My husband returned. He called out as if it were any ordinary day. His tone light, his presence louder than the door that opened and closed behind him. In the kitchen, I froze for a second. Then I turned, breathed once, and walked toward the hallway. He smiled when he saw me. A tired smile, nothing in his eyes. He carried a grocery bag and tossed his keys onto the counter like he always did. He said he stopped by the butcher's. That he thought we could all eat together tonight. All of us. He said it with casual precision. I looked at him. Then at the boy standing silent near the window. I asked if he needed help with dinner. He said no. I stood there for a moment longer, then walked back to the patio without a word. The sun was dipping behind the trees. The light was turning that honey color I used to love. Now, it only made me uneasy. We sat at the table later, the three of us. Chicken, salad, bread. My husband poured wine, laughed at his own joke about how dry the chicken was, complimented the rosemary. His fork clinked loudly against the plate with every bite. I could barely swallow. The boy kept his eyes on his food, careful not to speak unless spoken to. My husband leaned back in his chair midway through the meal and looked at both of us like a man admiring a painting he already owned. "It's nice," he said. "The three of us here again." That word, again, stuck to my skin like oil. After dinner, I went straight to the bathroom and closed the door behind me. I washed my hands slowly, watching the water swirl. I stayed there long enough to hear the plates being cleared. No one knocked. No one came to find me. Later that night, I sat on the edge of the bed, not knowing whether to scream or sleep. My phone buzzed. One message. From my sister. She had sent a photo from last summer. The three of us, standing in front of the vineyard in La Rioja. The boy was in the background, laughing. My husband's arm around my shoulder. I was smiling. The caption said, "You were so happy that day." I turned off my phone and placed it face down on the nightstand. In the morning, I woke to silence. Unnatural, waiting kind of silence. I got dressed quickly and stepped into the hallway. The guest room door was wide open. The bed stripped. Suitcase gone. Passport gone. I ran to the front window. His car wasn't there. I walked into the kitchen. My husband was sitting at the table, slowly buttering toast. He looked up, then back at his plate. "Early riser," he said. Like always. I waited for him to say more. He didn't. The day passed in fragments. I went to the bakery. I folded laundry. I walked through rooms like they belonged to someone else. I checked my phone again and again. Nothing. When evening came, my husband asked if I wanted to go away for the weekend. He said he booked us 2 nights in San Sebastián. That we needed it. That it would be good to clear the air. I asked why now. He looked at me, completely calm. "Because I want to start over." Then he stood and left the room. I sat on the couch and stared at the half-packed bag he had placed near the door. I didn't know what shocked me more, the invitation, or how little of a choice I felt I had. The next morning, we left early. The drive was filled with music I didn't recognize. He tapped the steering wheel, offered me gum at one point, commented on the lack of traffic. It felt surreal. We arrived at a small seaside inn. Our room faced the water. He unpacked methodically, as if we were there to relax. I stood by the window, unable to pull myself away from the horizon. Later, we walked along the promenade. He bought ice cream, made jokes, asked about the bakery in town. All his words like ornaments, perfectly placed. But nothing reached me. As we turned a corner, I stopped cold. There, on the bench near the church steps, sat a woman. Young. Dark hair. Legs crossed. Next to her, my husband's suitcase. The same one he brought home days ago. I watched him walk toward her without hesitation. She stood up, smiled. He handed her the scarf. My scarf. They laughed. Hugged. He kissed her cheek. And then he turned back toward me. No surprise on his face. Just that same calm. That same smile. Now, he said, we're even. I didn't move. The bench. The girl. The suitcase. His voice. Now we're even. It echoed inside my chest louder than it did in the plaza. And yet no one around seemed to hear it. Tourists passed us eating gelato. Children laughed near the carousel. A couple argued in French 2 tables down at the cafe. Life was continuing like nothing had happened, but my pulse was beating inside my ears like a drum in a war movie. He turned from her and walked back toward me with the same casual stride he'd used for 20 years, at airports, in markets, across parking lots. Like he was coming back from picking up bread. Not like he had just lit a match and dropped it into my spine. I opened my mouth but no sound came out. He passed me and said, I'm heading to the hotel. He didn't look back. I stood there for several minutes after he was gone. The girl didn't look my way again. She sat back down and pulled out her phone like she was waiting for a bus. My scarf was in her lap. I didn't follow either of them. Instead, I walked. Fast. My feet didn't know where they were going. I passed a bakery, a leather shop, a corner selling postcards of beaches I no longer cared to see. My legs were moving but my stomach had dropped completely. I ended up on a back street, narrow, damp, stone walls pressing in. I leaned against one and let the cold of it seep through my clothes. Then I laughed. Short. Dry. The kind of laugh that's just air escaping because crying would be too much effort. Even. Was that what he'd wanted all along? Balance? Closure? Revenge? I had no words. Just noise inside my head. I returned to the hotel at sunset. The room was dim, curtains drawn. He was sitting on the small terrace, barefoot, a glass of wine half drunk beside him. He looked at me as I entered, as if waiting to see whether I would explode or collapse. I did neither. I sat across from him. He nodded like that was the only answer he needed. Then, with that same easy tone, he asked, do you want to drive back tomorrow or stay one more night? I looked at him and saw a stranger I used to know. I don't know, I said. We slept in the same bed. Back to back. A canyon between us. I counted every breath, every shift of the mattress. The shadows from the terrace stretched across the wall like ropes waiting to pull us apart. In the morning, I woke before him. I packed my bag and left a note that simply said, I'll take the train. By the time I got to the station, the wind had picked up. I stood near the platform's edge, staring at the hills in the distance. A woman beside me was arguing with her son about snacks. An old man adjusted his tie in a smudged reflection. I was invisible among them. Weightless. I didn't go home. I went to Toledo. I needed space. Silence. Stone. The room I booked overlooked the cathedral. Everything there felt old enough to understand me without asking questions. I wandered the streets during the day, letting the hills burn my calves, letting the wind tangle my hair. I ate simple food. I drank local wine. I wrote nothing. I said little. On the third day, I sat outside a tiny cafe near the Alcazar with my back to the wall. The late afternoon light warmed the brick. I was halfway through a coffee I didn't like when I saw him. Not my husband. Him. He was standing by the fountain. Looking up. He hadn't seen me. His clothes were different. His hair shorter. But it was him. I froze, heart stuttering. He turned slowly, scanning the square, then checked his phone. He started to walk, deliberate, not rushed, toward the far side of the plaza. I stood. Crossed toward him without thinking. I caught up halfway down the alley. He turned at the sound of my steps. We didn't speak right away. Then he smiled, almost shy. I was hoping I'd see you. I blinked. What are you doing here? I live here now. It hit me like cold water. You moved? 3 days ago. I tried to process that. Tried to make the timeline fit with what I knew. What I thought I knew. Why here? He shrugged. It felt like a good place to start over. I didn't answer. I didn't know if I could. He asked if I wanted to walk. I nodded. We moved through the narrow streets, shoulder to shoulder but never touching. The stones beneath us slick from shade, the sky turning copper above. We talked about nothing at first, shops, weather, a guitar player in the plaza. Then he asked me what happened. I told him only the bare bones. The bench. The girl. The scarf. He was quiet a long time. Then he said, maybe he thought you wouldn't come back. I wasn't sure if I would. He looked over at me. His eyes soft. I'm glad you did. I turned away, my throat tightening. We sat near the cathedral steps as evening bells echoed through the city. Eventually, I stood and said I needed to return to the hotel. He didn't ask where it was. He just said, tomorrow? I didn't answer. At the hotel, a letter waited at the front desk. A plain envelope. No name. No room number. Just handed to the clerk by someone who had already disappeared. I opened it in the elevator. Inside was a photo. The same one. Me and him. Only this time, the red circle was gone. Replaced with a single word, printed cleanly across the bottom. Goodbye. I didn't sleep that night. I left the photo and the envelope on the desk, untouched, unopened after that single word, goodbye. I sat on the balcony of the small hotel, knees pulled up, watching Toledo fall asleep around me. The streets below went quiet by midnight. The orange lamps glowed across the stones like scattered embers. And still, my mind refused to slow down. I replayed everything. The bench. The scarf. The girl. The circle around our shadows. The way he smiled and said even. The way the boy stood under the fountain and told me he lived here now. The word printed on that photo that erased everything that came before it. By dawn, I knew I couldn't stay. I packed lightly. Just one bag. Left the photo on the desk, as if abandoning it would strip it of meaning. I walked to the station with the rising sun at my back, moving like someone who didn't know where they were going but had already decided to go anyway. The train ride home was quiet. No one sat next to me. I didn't read. I didn't check my phone. I stared out the window as the dry hills passed, one after the other, familiar and indifferent. When I arrived, the city felt louder than I remembered. Cars. Horns. Tourists shouting in 4 languages. Everything too fast. Everything too bright. I didn't go home. I took a cab to my sister's place instead. She wasn't expecting me. She opened the door in her pajamas, holding a half-eaten peach. I didn't say anything. Just walked past her and dropped my bag on the floor. She didn't ask questions. Just poured coffee and placed it in front of me like a silent agreement that whatever had happened could wait until I was ready. By afternoon, I went out. I needed to walk. To move. To breathe through motion. I ended up downtown, near the art museum. The one we used to visit every spring, pretending to care about brushstrokes and light when all we really wanted was to be anywhere but home. I wandered through the gallery, floor after floor, pretending the silence was calming. And then I saw it. Not a painting. Not a sculpture. A man. Sitting on the edge of a bench in the corner of the abstract wing. Him. The boy. He hadn't seen me. He was sketching. Something in his lap. Focused, calm, unaware. I should have left. But I didn't. I walked toward him. Halfway there, he looked up. We locked eyes. He stood slowly. Neither of us moved for a long moment. Then he said, "I didn't know if you'd come back." I didn't either. We left the museum without another word. Outside, the air smelled like summer. Warm stone. Dust. Roasted almonds from a vendor nearby. He led me to a small alley I hadn't noticed before. A quiet courtyard with 2 metal chairs under a flowering tree. We sat. He told me he hadn't planned it. Moving to Toledo. Seeing me at the cafe. Any of it. That he thought he'd ruined everything the night he left the house without a word. I thought if I left, I could protect you from what was coming. By disappearing? I didn't know what else to do. I looked down at my hands. We stayed like that a while. People passed in the distance, their footsteps echoing in the hollow street. Then he asked if I wanted to see his new place. I followed him. It was a small flat, top floor of an old building, filled with light and unfinished canvases. The walls were bare. The furniture minimal. It didn't feel like a home yet. But it didn't feel like a lie either. He showed me a sketchbook. He'd drawn from memory, Toledo rooftops, market stalls, shadows on pavement. Then he flipped a few pages and stopped. I saw my face. Not smiling. Not posing. Just looking. Real. I closed the book. We stood in silence. Then I stepped back. I can't stay. I know. I need time. He nodded. Take it. I left. No embrace. No final glance. Back outside, the streets were starting to cool. The air shifted, the scent of evening filling the corners of the plaza. I walked until the soles of my feet ached. By the time I returned to my sister's, the lights in the apartment were off. She had left the door unlocked. I slipped inside, dropped my bag, and went straight to the balcony. I stood there for a long time. No music. No cars. Just night. And then the light from the kitchen flicked on. I turned slowly. My husband stood in the doorway. He didn't say anything. I didn't either. He walked to the counter. Poured himself a glass of water. Drank half. Set it down. How long have you been back? He asked. An hour. You went to Toledo? Yes. He leaned against the fridge. The silence between us sharper than before. I left something for you, he said. Where? In the house. What is it? You'll know when you see it. I didn't move. He nodded, like that was all he came to say. Then he walked out, shutting the door quietly behind him. I stayed there another hour, staring into the dark. The next morning, I went home. The house was clean. Still. Unmoved. Like time had paused while I was away. But then I saw it. On the living room table. Not a photo. Not a note. A flash drive. I stared at it. Small. Innocent. I picked it up. Slid it into the laptop. A video file. I pressed play. But it wasn't a confrontation. It wasn't surveillance. It was him. My husband. Standing in the center of the living room. Speaking to the camera. This is not for revenge. It's not to hurt you. I just want to show you what I saw. What I felt. Maybe then, you'll understand. The video ended. Black screen. No sound. No further explanation. And then I realized. The camera had never been on. It had never recorded. It was a performance. For me. For himself. He needed to say it, even if no one was listening. And somehow, that was worse. I watched the blank screen for what felt like hours. The blackness didn't flicker, didn't move. Just sat there in silence, daring me to react. My reflection hovered faintly in it, tired and still. When I finally closed the laptop, the house seemed louder than before. The floor creaked under my steps, the walls shifted with the afternoon heat, the trees outside scraped their shadows along the windows like fingernails. Everything felt like it was leaning in. He hadn't recorded anything. He had just stood there, talked to the silence, and left. And the flash drive wasn't a message. It was an invitation. Or a challenge. Or maybe a mirror. I walked through the house slowly. Everything looked exactly as I had left it the last time I'd believed it was mine. The bedroom, his side of the closet empty now. My clothes still hung in place, untouched. Shoes lined up in rows, a scarf on the chair, a bottle of lotion unopened on the dresser. I didn't touch anything. I just moved room to room like a stranger visiting someone else's carefully curated past. Then I noticed the table in the hallway. It used to hold framed photos. Vacation shots, dinner parties, one of us on the Amalfi Coast. All of them gone. In their place was a small vase. Inside, a single dried eucalyptus branch. I kept walking. The kitchen was spotless. Sink dry. Fridge humming low. On the counter, a folded dish towel I didn't recognize. It was new. A gift, maybe. Or a replacement. I poured myself a glass of water, drank half, left the rest. I didn't sit down. Instead, I stepped outside. The patio tiles burned under my bare feet. The lemon tree had started to drop fruit, yellow orbs scattered in the dirt like forgotten plans. The garden beds were dry. The herbs shriveled. I hadn't watered anything in days. In the back corner, near the fence, the old swing still hung lopsided. I crossed the yard and sat down, letting the chain groan with my weight. The wind moved lazily, just enough to make the leaves rustle in patterns that sounded almost like voices. That's when I saw the dust on the ground had shifted. Near the back gate, 2 sets of footprints, coming in, not going out. I stood immediately, heartbeat quickening, skin prickling. I walked to the gate and opened it. No one. Just the gravel path. But there, resting against the inside post, leaned something new. A folded newspaper. I picked it up. It wasn't today's. It was dated 4 days ago. And it was open to the local section. Circled in pen, again red ink, was a small announcement. Exhibit opening, La Musa Invisible, works from the private collection of A.R. I stared at it for a full minute before the letters started to align in my brain. La Musa Invisible. I knew that title. We'd said it once, joking, in a half-whispered conversation after one of our long, tangled afternoons near the lake. Back when everything had just begun and nothing had broken yet. He had called me that. His invisible muse. The exhibit was in the city. Opened 3 days ago. Ran for a week. I checked the time. I grabbed my keys. I drove without music, without air conditioning. Windows down, hair whipping in my face, sun burning into my arms. By the time I reached the gallery, my throat was dry and my pulse felt sharp in my neck. The space was quiet. Cool. Almost too white. The walls were lined with paintings, sketches, mixed media pieces. No labels. No descriptions. Just numbers in the corners. I moved slowly. First, a painting of a courtyard, not mine, but familiar. The sunlight poured in at the same angle I'd seen from my sister's balcony. Second, a shadow of a woman walking down stone steps. Bare feet. Skirt caught in wind. Third, 2 empty chairs on a train platform. Fourth, a pair of hands holding a scarf. Fifth, just color. Reds, golds, soft pale greens. Abstract, blurry. But I knew that palette. It was me. Sixth, a face. Not exact. Not literal. But mine. Not smiling. Not crying. Just exposed. I turned to the final piece in the corner. It was different. A photo, not a painting. Me. Standing in the gallery's reflection. Taken through the glass. My outline barely visible, framed by the city behind me. And handwritten below it in pencil. She was never invisible. I just wasn't looking. I turned around. But the gallery was empty. No guests. No staff. No sign of him. I stood there, completely still. Then I heard the sound of soft footsteps behind the curtain at the back of the gallery. But when I pulled it open, there was no one. Just an open door. And through that door, another. And then another. Leading into a narrow hallway that seemed to wind further and further into the building. I followed. Until I stepped into a quiet, white room. No lights. No windows. Just one chair in the middle. And on that chair? A flash drive. Just like the last one. I picked it up. No note. No envelope. No explanation. I tucked it in my bag and left the room. I didn't look back. I didn't ask if he was watching. I didn't want to know. When I got back home, the sun had almost set. The shadows stretched long across the floor. I went straight to the laptop. I inserted the drive. A single file. I pressed play. The screen flickered once. Then a soft image appeared. Not him. Not me. A painting. Of the swing in our garden. And on it? Me. Alone. Still. But facing the camera this time. Like I'd finally turned around. Then the screen went black. That's when the power in the house cut. All at once. Total silence. No light. No sound. Just the last image burning behind my eyes. And then. Footsteps on the porch.